Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. So this is the continuation of the last video where you have seen constructor in-depth part 1. So today we are going to discuss the constructor in-depth part 2. So what we covered in the part 1? So in the part 1 we covered what is a constructor, what is a constructor, what is the use of, what is the use of constructor, different rules for constructor, different rules for constructor, and I think constructor overloading. So today we are going to see a new thing called as constructor and inheritance. So now you have to see the constructor and inheritance. What is the relationship between constructor and inheritance? Are the constructor inherited from the superclass to the subclass? So all those things we are going to discuss in this part 2 video. Okay. My first question to all of you, are the constructor inherited from superclass to subclass? This is a very interesting topic. Are the constructor inherited from superclass to subclass? We know constructors are not inherited from superclass to subclass, but why it is not inherited and what is the properties of constructor in the inheritance? We'll see that. Okay, so the first thing, are the constructor inherited from the superclass to subclass? Okay, so answer is here straight no. It is no, because constructors are constructors are not members of a class. These are not the members of a class. Only members like variables, methods, nested classes are inherited. So these things are inherited, but constructors are not inherited. A simple example, we'll see why constructors are not inherited. Simple thing, suppose I'm having a class A. Okay, I'm having a class A. So what is the constructor for the class A? What is the name? Even we write our constructor or the compiler provide A, right? So if I'm gonna write another class B extends A, right? What should be the constructor of B? It is B, right? Even though, but why it is not inherited? Suppose this is inherited. Let's assume it is inherited to B. Now, what is to be considered this A here? What can we say the about A inside B? It is not a method because return type is not specified. Obviously, compiler is going to give us error. So it is not a method because no return type there. So if we are writing something similar kind of method but no return type, it should be considered as constructor. But the constructor thumb rule is saying the name of the constructor and the name of the class must be same, but it is not same here. It is not same here. That means it is again another compilation error. So that's why we don't have the inheritance of a constructor. That means simple thing, constructors are not inherited from superclass to constructor is not inherited from superclass to subclass, but it plays a very vital role in inheritance. Let's see by one simple example. Okay, let's see. I'm having a class super. Okay, now simple thing, public void m1. M1 means method 1. I will write here system dot out dot println println m1. Then I will write a class sub extends super. Class sub extends super. Super. Let's define here another method m2. M2. Okay. Now I will write here public static void main string args. Right? I will create the subclass object. Now can anyone tell how many methods are there in the subclass? It is two. One is its own, another one is inherited. Very nice. Now sub is equal to new sub is equal to new sub I created. Mind you, this is the constructor, but I have not written the constructor. Fine, no problem. Sub dot m1. It is the calling the parent class method sub dot m2 calling its own function. Now let's save it and see where we are saving in the F drive core Java applications. Let's put it as sub dot Java. Okay, now it is colorful. Now Java C space sub.java. I am compiling this. What should be the output? Simple. M1. Oh, it should be M2. Otherwise, 2 times M1. M1, M2. Fine. Okay. Now, let's jump into some interesting thing. I am now writing my own constructor. Then I will write here. Just I'll copy paste. It will be better. I'll write here subclass constructor. Fine. Then I will again write another constructor for the superclass as well. We'll see here a twist because constructor name should be same as class name superclass constructor. Guys, now see Java C sub.java. What should be the output? Simple thing sub new sub. We are calling our own constructor. We are calling our own constructor. This is here. So obviously you can say subclass constructor is the first output, then M1 superclass constructor, M2 subclass constructor. Sorry, sub is equal to new sub. This is sub, first subclass constructor, then M1, M2. It will print M1 and M2. Okay, fine. Compile. Now let's execute it. What is this? We discussed we'll have subclass constructor M1, M2. But what is this superclass constructor? Then what is the superclass constructor? And we are not calling this constructor explicitly, and neither we have written super is equal to new super or super object reference any name is equal to new super. We have not invoked explicitly the superclass constructor. But surprisingly, how it is coming? This is very strange. This is very strange. That means what we understood. Most important point to note, whenever we create instance or object of a subclass, first instance or object of super or parent class is created. Super class created. If due to any problem it is failing to create superclass object, if it is failing to create superclass object, then subclass object cannot be created. It is very important takeaway from here. But how can I test it, sir? Simple thing. Make this as private. Make this as private. And let's see. Ayo, super has private access. That means that means super is private. So parent class object is not cannot be created outside of this parent class, because if it is private, it can be only accessible inside this class. That means someone is trying to create the superclass object out of superclass. Who is that fellow? This line. So when JVM is trying to execute this line, sub is equal to new sub, then it internally first trying to create the object of superclass, so that superclass constructor is invoked, but it is private access and we are trying to create object from here. So that's why the error is super has the private access. Now if you remove the super private here, it will happily execute, compile, and it will give us the output, right? That means what is the important takeaway here? Whenever we create instance or object of a subclass, first instance or object of superclass is created. If due to any problem, if due to any problem it is failing to create superclass object, just we saw that by declaring this as private, then subclass object cannot be created, and we have the proof now that it is not created. But sir, one question might be arising in your mind: how this call is happening? How this call is happening and who is calling this thing? If you know, there is something called as super, a reserved word, keyword you can say. It is for inheritance, and also there is something called this same thing. Super is called as superclass object reference. Superclass object reference. Superclass we can say implicit object reference. This is called as current class implicit object reference. Okay, for the inheritance super is responsible, not this. So then this super can be used for what purpose? We are saying it is super class implicit object reference. What do you mean by object reference? Object reference, suppose we are having a class A, we are creating object A is equal to new A. Actually, what is the object part? This part is the object part. This new keyword creates a memory, and constructor initializes the instance variable in that memory. We have already seen that like this. It is the memory in the computer memory. And here, this sample, or we can say here A is a implicit pointer, or it is called as the reference variable. Though here we have not created the object of super, super is equal to new super, but still We know whenever we create the subclass object by line number 20, automatically superclass object is created. But that is internal, right? Boss, object is fine, but if I don't have a reference variable to the object, how can I access the members and methods? For example, I will write only new A. Object is created, but how to access this object? We don't have a reference which will point to that object. That's why we need a reference like this. And whenever we want to call some methods, call some fields or variables, we always have the left side part, that is the reference variable part. And when we have the reference variable, then we can access those things, right? So here, whenever we clear the child class object, so undoubtedly the parent class or superclass object is created. So Java provides a mechanism to access those that internal or implicit created object, and that super is the reference variable which points to internally created object. That means, in other words, I will say super means, suppose I am having here, okay, suppose I am having here the internal object, and this object let it be of subclass, sorry, superclass, whatever the program we wrote, superclass, right, which is internally created superclass. And this predefined keyword super is one internal or implicit reference variable which points to the object super. On the other hand, when you create the object of subclass, then who is here? Here sub is our reference variable. Here sub is our reference variable. Okay. Now super, but sub we explicitly created this one, but super is implicit and it is internal. Okay. Then sir, you mentioned about the super, but you have said something about this actually. What is this? Okay. So we have created here the object for what? Subclass, right? Suppose I don't want to create the object of subclass. I want to call these methods and variables directly without creating object explicitly. Then what is that? Now this, each class is having internal object reference which is called as this. If I will use this in the superclass, then this will always point to its same object for super. And if I will refer this within from subclass or within subclass, and it always refers to subclass object, and it always refers to the subclass object, right? So what do you mean by this? This is current class object. If I don't want to create here sub equal to new sub, right, instead of sub I want to use ready-made object reference available, that is nothing but called like this. We'll see this later, but now the most important is the super, right? So what is the purpose of super, sir? Super can be used in variety of cases. First one, calling superclass constructor, calling superclass constructor. Second point, calling superclass methods, calling superclass variables. Okay, that means you can say here that constructors are not inherited, but we have a mechanism to explicitly call the superclass constructor, explicitly call. But the question is, now you told whenever we create the parent class constructor, sorry, when we create child class object, automatically parent class object is created. That means we have seen here, whenever we are doing sub is equal to new sub, automatically super is getting called, right? Automatically super is getting called. Then why need to call explicitly then? Huh? Just we discussed that when we create subclass object, automatically superclass object created and hence the constructor is executed. But why explicit call and why there is a provision to call? And these two things we will discuss later actually. But our main topic is the constructor, not this methods and other things. Okay, we'll focus on this one. But why? There is some problem actually here. Let me tell you. Now let's make it integer a. Let's make it a parameterized constructor. I was having the default constructor initially and I made it a parameterized constructor. Now let's compile and execute and see what kind of output we are getting. Okay, compile. Oh, we are getting error here. Constructor superclass cannot be applied to given type sub required int found nowhere. What is this error, sir? I have only modified the super int a. I have not changed anything in the sub, but I am getting error in sub. Then what is this happening? Right? Here is the twist. Okay, before that, suppose I am having a class A. Sorry, I am having a class A. This class A is having a constructor A, right? And I am having class B extends A, and here I am having B. And mind you, you can call constructor from constructor only, not from functions. Okay, we can call superclass constructor, super class constructor from subclass constructor only, and it must be the first line inside the constructor, inside the subclass constructor. What do you mean by this? Inside the subclass constructor. That means I can call this superclass constructor A from B only, and it should be the first line. For example, here is something syso system.println. You cannot write below, you cannot call below, and you can call only the first line. And to call it is default constructor, right? So I have to just write super. That's it. Suppose if it is parameterized int a, then what I should do? I have to pass one integer. That's it. Super. Then what is the type of argument within brackets you need to pass? Okay. Then if you are saying this, okay, fine. Now here what is happening? Now here if I am again coming back to this point, here integer a I have passed and it is giving me the error now. But I will now try this thing. Super is the keyword. See, the color came. And I will explicitly call from my end whatever concept we learned here by this way. Super, integer a, then super. I'll pass here 10. Now see, now compile beautifully. Output I got. Then one question might be coming to your mind. Then, sir, when it was like this, we don't need to call the super. We don't need to call the super, right? It is automatically executing. But we learned that to call the default constructor, if it is default, we can use plain super. That means, sir, somebody is writing super here for me, which is internally working, because until unless you call, right, it cannot be executed because it is not inherited. So if it is default, I'm not calling here. But I can call explicitly also like this. That means if I'm not writing, somebody is writing for me. What do you think? It is very interesting. Yes, the important takeaway is another note I will write. If we write a default constructor, then Java compiler will add call to parent constructor using super. That means compiler is automatically adding here super for me. That is the beauty. Now you can say, sir, we know object is the parent of superclass of all classes. That means my superclass is also child of object. That mean here the super keyword is also written by the compiler? Yes, it is written by the compiler. If we have the default constructor, if we provided or compiler provided, always the first line is super, even though you write it or you don't write it. Compiler will provide if you don't write, but it is there, right? But if it is coming to parameterized, then compiler is won't provide for you because compiler doesn't know how many parameters will pass, right? In that case, you have to pass this. See, so this is the concept of constructor with inheritance, right? And important takeaway here is if we don't write a default constructor or even we write a default constructor, then automatically if we don't write call to the superclass default constructor, compiler will write for us. That is for sure. Even here because it is a straight child, but even here also because it is the child of object class, right? But if your parent is having parameterized constructor, then you have to explicitly call. I think you got your answer when I called you, sorry, when I said why we explicitly need to call superclass constructor. Similarly, have also you can say why to use superclass methods and variables. Suppose I want to change some variables of the parent class or superclass in the child class specific, then I can explicitly call that and I can change that value. Similarly for methods also. Okay, we'll see that those things later. So this is the relationship between inheritance and constructor. Let's test and some more things we'll discuss. This is for Q and A, you can say. I have written a class A. I have not written a default constructor here. So who will provide a default constructor? Compiler, right? If compiler write a default constructor, then what it will do? It will write super here, correct? Yes, right. Now, class B, another example, class B. You have written the default constructor, class B, and you have written some sort of codes as well, some lines of code, and it suppose extends A, right? Then what will happen here? Does compiler provide here call to super internally? Yes, it will call to super internally. Next, Okay, now there is a simple questions class A. This A is having a constructor A and it is having int x, and here we are writing syso system.out for short form x. Constructor ended. Now class B extends A, B into I. Similarly you can write syso y, syso y. Now pspm string args, of course, args, of course. Now bb equal to new b, but with output. Who can say what will be the output? First of all, it is compilation error because b is not having default constructor. Let's pass 10. What will happen? This will give us compilation error because you don't have a default constructor in b, right? So there are two solutions to it. One is you have to write super and pass as same y you can pass. This is one. Otherwise, you can define, but if you define a default constructor, you have to create the object using default constructor only. So that will not fit here. Okay. So this will the thing. Now it will give the output. No compilation error. Second one, class A, private A, class B extends A. Now it is B, default constructor. Now public static void main you can write B equal to new B. Now the question is the code going to compile? No, the code is not going to compile because the constructor is private. So we cannot call the constructor from here. The constructor is private. We cannot call the constructor from here. And it is also another point we can make out that if the constructor is private, even though you use super, you can call it. Let's see it. Make this as private. Okay. And now compile, won't work. Private access, right? So this is a very interesting topic about constructor and inheritance. How it is written, it is very important. Yes, I forgot one very important thing. You can also say, sir, what about after classes? What about, I forgot that. After class, ABST, What about after classes? After classes can have constructor because it is having variable. So class A, sorry, abstract. After class A, and you are having a constructor here, and then class B extends A, then you are having B. Now whenever I will create the object of B, what do you think? This constructor will execute or not? Because this abstract class, mind you, objects cannot be created. So before drawing any conclusion, let's see this. I will define it as abstract class super. As usual, whatever the things are there. Just simple I declare it as abstract. Compile, very nice, same output, superclass constructor. Then what can we conclude? Does that make sense that after class instances are created? Because we know whenever instance is created, constructor executed. Without instance, you cannot execute the constructor, right? Yes. After class, implicit instance is created. Implicit instance is created. But you cannot create explicit instance. You cannot create explicit instance, only implicit instance created, and the constructor is also getting executed, right? We can see another proof here. Let's see in a equal to 10, though we have not discussed it, but for a proof, plus super dot a m to 10. See, value is 10. See, this is object reference dot variable name, right? That means after class implicit instance is internally created, because after class is a class, maybe abstract, but it's a class, not interface, and it can hold instance variable. Obviously, that should be initialized, right? That means the biggest conclusion is here. After class instance is internally created, and after class constructor also getting executed when you create the child class. That I forgot to add, and this is the thing. Okay, guys. So this is about the constructor and inheritance and what we have learned here. So today we have learned here about relationship between the constructor and inheritance when you create the subclass instance, how the superclass instance is first created, and how internally the default constructor is executed, and how the compiler add the default super keyword to call the superclass constructor when there is no default constructor in the super. Remember, when, very important point, when there is no default constructor in superclass, then we must have to call superclass constructor from subclass using uh, using super. Okay, otherwise the object won't be created. Otherwise the object won't be created. Okay, so this is this thing we cover. Then how we can explicitly use super, how compiler adds, and different use cases of it. If the constructor is private, what will happen? And we have covered all this. Okay, so in the coming part, we'll be looking for constructor and inheritance, how they are related. Sorry, constructor with inheritance with exception handling. I forgot to add exception handling. Constructor and inheritance plus exception handling. If a constructor in the superclass throws some exceptions, and while you are calling that in the superclass, what you have to do there? The exception will be propagated to the subclass, and how we can do that. Of course, that is very simple, and we'll see that. Okay, thanks for watching the video. Bye.